Our story begins after a chemical agent meant to stop global warming backfires, freezing the world and ending all life. 17 years later, the only survivors of humanity live aboard the rattling Ark, a massive train that never stops. Armed guards enter the tail section, a dark and crowded slum where the poorest passengers are kept in squalor. They force the inhabitants to sit on the floor for a head count. It is basically the worst morning commute in history. During the inspection, an officer asks if there are any experienced violinists among the crowd. An elderly couple steps forward and admits they played in a symphony orchestra. Finally, those music lessons pay off. But the guards only want the husband, and they immediately begin to forcibly separate him from his wife. When he refuses to let her go, a guard beats him with a baton. To these guys, customer service is just a suggestion. He is dragged away as he yells a desperate promise to return for her. Soon after, a man with a nose injury finds a hidden object inside a protein block. This discovery will eventually mean everything. Curtis tries to trade his own food for that specific block. Apparently, he is a very picky eater even in the apocalypse. He secures a red capsule hidden inside and tells his friend Tanya that the time for a revolt is finally approaching. Curtis opens the capsule to find a small slip of paper with a secret message. He and an elder named Gilliam read the name Nam Kung Min Soo, identifying him as a legendary security expert. Edgar points out the slight flaw in the plan. Their genius expert is currently locked in the prison car. Curtis later admits to Gilliam that he is not the hero Edgar thinks he is. Every revolution needs a guy with a dark past. He explains a plan to breach the gates during a 4-second window when all the doors are open at once. The ultimate goal is to seize the engine and kill the train's creator, Wilford. Gilliam insists that Curtis should be the one to run the train once the job is done. However, Curtis remains focused on the strategic necessity of the engine. He knows that whoever controls the heat controls the world. Curtis continues his conversation with Gilliam, vowing to take the engine and kill Wilford to finally end the oppression of the tail section. But Edgar is more concerned with the future, insisting that Curtis must lead the entire train once their mentor is gone. The planning is interrupted when guards enter the tail section to announce a mandatory medical inspection for all the children. A woman in a bright yellow coat arrives with the security detail to begin the selection, because nothing says child welfare like a squad of goons. She uses a tape measure to evaluate a boy named Timmy as the crowd watches in a heavy, desperate silence. The woman soon discovers another child hidden beneath the clothing of a passenger, leaving the guards to deal with the parents. They use violence to suppress the crowd and forcibly remove the selected children. The price of survival on this train is starting to become clear. During the chaos, the guard sees a boy named Andy from his mother, Tanya. His father, Andrew, fights the guards in a desperate attempt to reclaim his son, but he is quickly overpowered by the armed men. In a final act of defiance, Andrew throws a shoe at the high-ranking official named Mason, striking her right in the face. While she recovers from the shock, the guards drag Timmy away as the rest of the passengers watch in horror. Technicians then prepare Andrew for a brutal punishment by applying a mysterious substance to his shoulder. An officer sets a 7-minute timer and hangs the device around the neck of the prisoner. This is not going to be a fun countdown. The guards then force the arm of Andrew through a specialized port in the side of the train, exposing it to the elements. He screams in agony as his limb is subjected to the sub-zero temperatures outside. Apparently, the train does not have a human resources department. As the timer ticks down, Mason prepares to give a speech while a guard presents the offending shoe on a silver tray. She begins a lecture about the dangers of disorder, using the footwear as a prop to explain their place in the world. Mason then places the dirty shoe on the head of Andrew to mock the tail section. It is a humiliating display of absolute power. She explains that she is the hat, and they are the shoes, and shoes belong on feet, not on heads. Very poetic, lady. Following this, she preaches that the sacred engine is the source of all order on the locomotive and must be respected above all else. Mason warns that a sacred line is crossed when the foot seeks the place of the head, essentially telling them to stay in their lane. She tries to radio Wilford for final approval, but the signal fails, leaving the executioners to operate on autopilot. A guard uses a hammer to shatter the frozen arm of Andrew. The sound is something they will never forget. Satisfied with the trauma, Mason orders the punishment to proceed as scheduled while the tail section watches in stunned silence. She and her security detail depart the car now that the dirty work is finished. Another productive day at the office. Curtis restrains Edgar from attacking the guards, knowing a suicide mission would help nobody right now. Gilliam approaches Mason to speak once the violence settles, moving slowly through the crowd of desperate passengers. Mason greets him with mock politeness, treating the leader of the poor like a slightly annoying old friend. He asks her to tell Wilford they must talk, hoping for a diplomatic solution to the escalating cruelty. Mason claims Wilford has no reason to visit the tail, as if the great engineer is too busy for the help. Curtis observes the guards and their rifles closely. He is looking for a weakness that might not be visible yet. A mother is forced to place her baby into a barrel for transport, a desperate move for a desperate situation. A man takes the infant and notes the contribution as if he is checking off a grocery list. He then retrieves a small statue from another passenger to add to the stash of items moving toward the front. Curtis opens a tin containing chunks of chronol, an industrial waste that serves as a makeshift drug for the weary. He negotiates a trade for the rocks, showing that even in the apocalypse, there is always a black market. Curtis tells Gilliam the guards likely lack bullets, suspecting their power is just a very convincing bluff. He explains that the ammunition was likely spent during a past revolt, leaving the soldiers with very expensive clubs. Gilliam advises waiting for the next red letter, as these mysterious messages have guided their timing before. Following his lead, the passengers move barrels in a synchronized rhythm to keep the peace and their secrets hidden. While the plan sits in motion, the painter visits a man in his bunk to share a charcoal sketch of the man's son. Soon after, he delivers the drawing to Tanya. It is a small piece of home in a place that has forgotten what home looks like. Following this, she tells Curtis she is joining the mission to the front to rescue her boy. She is not asking for permission, but an alarm suddenly blares, and Curtis orders everyone to hide their weapons because the guards are making an early return. The soldiers enter for a surprise head check, clearly suspecting the passengers are up to more than just synchronized barrel moving. Just then, Andrew leads a vocal protest about the terrible quality of the food blocks. Because if you are going to revolt, do it on an empty stomach. As the tension peaks, Curtis studies the guards and whispers to Gilliam that those rifles might actually be empty. He grabs a soldier and forces the man to pull the trigger against his own head, proving the bluff is over. Andrew shouts the truth to the crowd, and the realization that their captors are toothless triggers of violent uprising. The passengers grab a massive steel pipe to use as a battering ram, turning a hallway into a high-speed mosh pit. Curtis and the rebels use the ram to smash through the first internal security gate, finally breaking out of their cage. They jam the pipe into the next set of closing doors, refusing to let the guards lock them back into the tail section. Then Gray runs along the top of the pipe and leaps onto a guard to steal his security keys. The shirtless man subdues him and secures the ring of keys, because apparently, shirts just slow you down during a coup. Edgar takes the keys and frantically searches for the right one to unlock a heavy prison drawer. The rebels pull it open to find Nam Kung Min Soo, the security expert they need to move forward. He is literally on ice. They examine the unconscious man and realize he is heavily addicted to chronol, the very drug Curtis was just trading for. Edgar places a piece of the industrial waste in the man's mouth to revive him. It is the world's worst smelling salt. He sits up, and Curtis asks if he is indeed the specialist who designed the security systems for the entire train. Curtis then uses a translation device to speak with him, as Nam seems more interested in his next fix than a conversation. Nam Kung Min Soo uses the translation device to correct the pronunciation of his name. Apparently, even in a post-apocalyptic hellscape, branding is important. Curtis ignores the attitude and explains they are taking the front of the train, and they need Nam's expertise to bypass the security gates. He offers the specialist one lump of chronol for every door he opens, dangling the addiction like a carrot on a stick. Nam then shocks everyone by pulling out a cigarette. These have been extinct for years, so he is basically holding a museum piece that gives you cancer. Curtis is not impressed by the luxury and gives him an ultimatum: take the drugs and help, or get stuffed back into the freezer. When the man hesitates, a scuffle breaks out as the rebels try to force him back into the drawer. It is a very violent game of Tetris. Nam stops the fight and uses his keys to open the neighboring drawer instead of the exit. Inside, a young woman is revealed. She is dazed and shivering from the deep freeze, but she is very much alive. Nam identifies her as his daughter, Yona, and refuses to move an inch unless she joins the mission. He also doubles his price to 2 lumps of kronol per door. Negotiating while everyone is armed and angry is a bold move. Yona begins inspecting a panel in the floor with an intensity that suggests she hears something the others cannot. She senses that the path ahead is clear and tells them no guards are waiting behind the next gate. Following her lead, she takes a piece of kronol to fully wake her father before they proceed. With the expert finally on board, the passengers force open the gate and surge into the next section. But the group finds the car completely abandoned, with no soldiers in sight to stop their advance. They stop in their tracks as they see the frozen outside world through a window, a sight they have not witnessed in nearly 2 decades. Gilliam and the others are stunned by the ruins of a frozen city. It is a cold reminder of why they are stuck on this metal tube. He reflects on the dead world outside, noting that everything they once knew is buried under the ice. The rebels continue forward into the manufacturing car, where the black protein blocks are produced for the tail section. They find Paul, who explains the machinery is failing and he has to operate it manually. Working in a post-apocalyptic factory looks like a real blast. The passengers observe the production of the protein blocks, seeing how the tail section is fed. Paul refuses to join the rebellion and chooses to stay at his post, while Curtis tries to convince him otherwise. But the tour's charm ends when Edgar discovers the protein blocks are made of ground-up insects. Bon appetit, everyone. Curtis reacts with pure horror to the truth about their food source. It turns out ignorance really was delicious. While processing the bug buffet, he finds a hidden message capsule tucked inside the factory machinery. Paul reveals he has been the one passing these messages inside the food, acting as an internal contact. The group gathers to read the new message, which simply contains the word water. Following this, Gilliam realizes that seizing the water supply must be their next strategic priority. He tells Curtis that controlling the water is the only way to force a real negotiation with the front of the train. Meanwhile, Nam and Edgar argue over using kronol as payment. Using drugs as currency is certainly one way to run an economy. During a quiet moment, Curtis asks Yona her age and learns she is only 17 years old. He notes that she is a trained baby who has never stepped on soil, and begins sharing his own history from before the freeze. Yona asks what the Earth was like, but he claims he does not want to remember the world that died. Then he asks her if she is clairvoyant, wondering if her strange behavior is actually a gift. He explains that she always seems to know exactly what is waiting behind the gates before they even open. Just then, Yona senses something terrible and screams for the group not to open the next door. But Nam triggers the door mechanism anyway, ignoring the warning from the girl who sees through walls. The doors slide back to reveal a massive force of guards armed with axes, waiting in the shadows. They stand in a silent, intimidating formation, completely blocking the path forward for the rebels. The guards begin preparing their weapons as the passengers realize they are in for a bloodbath. Edgar and the other tail section passengers stare in horror at the overwhelming force of the enemy. But Curtis and Edgar step forward anyway, ready to lead their people into a collision. Suddenly, a guard holds up a massive fish, a strange ritual that hints at a darker purpose for the weapons. The guard then slices the fish open with his axe to bloody the blade. Just a little psychological warfare for the road. Following this, Curtis and Edgar exchange a few final words of caution while the masked men prepare their strike. A heavy silence hangs over the corridor as the two groups face off. Then the peace ends as everyone charges into a violent, head-on collision. A chaotic and bloody melee erupts immediately within the narrow confines of the train car. While the battle rages, Edgar fights desperately against multiple masked attackers who try to pull him down. Curtis shouts for the second team to advance, trying to maintain order in the middle of the carnage. Blood from the combatants splatters across the windows as the fight grows more desperate. He engages the guards in brutal hand-to-hand combat, swinging a heavy axe to clear a path through the line. The passengers struggle to hold their ground, realizing their revolution has become a fight for survival. It is a long way to the front. Still, Curtis pushes forward with violent force, using every ounce of strength to break the enemy ranks. He leads the rebels through the darkness of the car, fueled by years of resentment and the hope of reaching the engine. Using his axe, he strikes down another guard while the rest of the group follows close behind. Nearby, Nam and Yona take a moment to look out the window at the frozen world passing them by. Just then, an official with a megaphone announces that the train is crossing the Yekaterina Bridge. The guards begin a synchronized countdown. Usually, when the guys in masks start counting, it means something bad is coming. Meanwhile, the train crosses the massive bridge spanning a deep and frozen canyon. Looking out the window, a train official spots massive blocks of ice obstructing the tracks ahead. Seeing the danger, Curtis orders the rebels to brace for impact as the engine hurtles toward the frozen wall. The train smashes through the first block, sending frozen debris flying in every direction. But then a second, larger impact occurs, slamming the train into a massive wall of ice and throwing everyone inside into chaos. Against the odds, the train clears the blockage, and the rebels take a brief moment to celebrate being alive. Soon after, the engine completes the bridge crossing and begins its approach toward a distant mountain range. Back inside, Mason arrives at the front of the guard line to personally address the filthy rebels. She uses a megaphone to call them ingrates, which is a bold choice of words for someone currently being shot at. The official continues by praising the benevolence of Wilford for providing them with life-saving food and shelter. Then she condemns the group for their actions in the water supply section, claiming they have disrupted the sacred balance. Mason coldly declares that precisely 74% of the rebels are now scheduled to die. A rebel responds by throwing a black food block that hits her right in the face. Honestly, she earned that. Wiping the grease off, she watches through binoculars as her guards prepare to end the uprising once and for all. Just then, the guards lower their night vision goggles in perfect unison. While the masked men advance, Yona translates a grim warning from Nam about the impending fate of the passengers. She explains that a long tunnel lies immediately ahead, which is probably not great news for people without flashlights. Nam emphasizes the length of the tunnel to Curtis, but the warning comes too late to change their position. The train plunges into the darkness, leaving the rebels completely blind in a narrow metal tube. Using their night vision, the guards begin a one-sided slaughter of the passengers who cannot see the blades coming. Mason watches the carnage through her own green-tinted lens with visible amusement. Some people just love their jobs. Realizing they are at a total disadvantage, Curtis screams for his people to bring fire forward immediately. In the back, a young boy named Chan strikes a match, creating the first spark of hope in the dark. Soon after, the tail section passengers ignite torches and begin a frantic relay to get that light to the front lines. The sudden flare of fire completely blinds the guards, leaving a panicked Mason visibly shaken by the turn of events. While the masked men struggle to see, the rebels use their new advantage to launch a fierce and bloody counterattack. During the chaos, Edgar manages to capture Officer Fuyu and demands that the rest of the guards surrender right now. But Curtis is too busy eyeing Mason to notice a man in a suit sneaking up to stab Edgar in the gut. Talk about a costly distraction. Instead of helping his dying friend, Curtis makes the cold choice to ignore Edgar and focus entirely on seizing the leader. He successfully lunges through the smoke to grab Mason, holding a jagged blade against her throat to end the slaughter. Curtis bellows for everyone to stop the violence while he holds his high-value hostage tight. Just then, the train finally emerges from the tunnel into the blinding daylight as the fighting grinds to a halt. Seeing that their boss is about 2 inches away from a very bad haircut, the guards finally drop their weapons. Curtis keeps his grip firm on Mason as the brutal battle officially ends. Then he stabs the enemy leader just to be sure, effectively concluding the fight on his own terms. Yona looks around in absolute horror at the bloody aftermath, realizing that winning looks a lot like losing. Nam eventually finds her covered in blood among the piles of casualties and debris. He gently tells her to look away from the dead bodies littering the floor of the car. Meanwhile, Gilliam finds the fallen Edgar and tenderly closes his eyes. The price of this victory was higher than anyone expected. Following the silence, Gilliam tells the exhausted survivors that they need to wash themselves off. He then directs the weary group toward the water supply section to recover from the carnage they just endured. The survivors use the water supply to scrub the blood from their skin and try to wash away the memory of the massacre. But the peace is short-lived as Tanya confronts Mason, demanding to know where the stolen children are hidden. When the official plays coy, Andrew produces a hammer to help her find her voice. She finally cracks, claiming Wilford only took the children because he genuinely likes them, which is definitely not a creepy thing to say at all. She continues her sermon by declaring the engine sacred and Wilford divine, clearly drinking the entire vat of Kool-Aid. Curtis is not buying the religious act, so he dares her to call her God for help and see if he actually answers. While they talk, Mason reveals the water supply actually comes from the very front of the train. She also laughs and admits that Wilford has been watching their entire bloody journey like it is his favorite reality show. This revelation suggests the game is far bigger than they realize. When she mocks Edgar's death, Curtis snaps and lunges at her. The grief of his loss is finally manifesting as pure, unfiltered rage. Desperate to stay alive, Mason offers to guide him to the front. Turns out her loyalty to the divine engine has a shelf life. She pleads for her life as the blade gets uncomfortably close to her throat. The two strike a deal to help Curtis reach Wilford. Nothing builds a friendship like a little light extortion and a death threat. As they prepare to move, Gilliam asks if Curtis is still determined to finish this. The road ahead is only getting darker. Curtis insists they must press on before the guards can regroup and turn the tide against them again. He decides to lead the way with Mason, leaving Gilliam behind to look after the many wounded soldiers. But Gilliam stops him, telling him he is already the leader the tail section needs, and he must accept the heavy burden of command. Curtis looks down in shame, expressing guilt that he still has both of his arms when others gave so much. Following their talk, the old man gives him the final directions toward the engine room. However, he leaves him with a chilling warning. Cut out Wilford's tongue before he can speak. Words might be more dangerous than bullets. Finally, Gilliam tells Gray to join the group to ensure their new leader actually makes it to the finish line. The group moves forward and enters a massive, lush greenhouse car. While they catch their breath, Nam shows Yona a handful of soil and explains its history before the world froze. She discovers a live worm wriggling in the dirt, a sign that life is still finding a way in this metal tube. Soon after, the group enters a massive aquarium car where Yona gazes at the fish swimming overhead. It is a surreal moment of beauty in a very ugly war. Mason leads the tail sectioners through the underwater tunnel to a sushi bar. Apparently, even the apocalypse has a fine dining section. She explains that sushi is a rare delicacy served only twice a year to maintain the ecosystem. Following this, she lectures the weary group on the necessity of precise ecological balance on the train. It is a lot of talk from someone currently at gunpoint. The tail sectioners are finally served fresh sushi, tasting real food for the first time in years. As they eat, Curtis and Nam look out the window at the frozen, jagged ruins of a city passing them by. The moment is interrupted when Curtis forces Mason to eat a piece of the black protein block she used to feed them. Talk about a forced dietary pivot. She reluctantly chews the gelatinous brick under his intense, unforgiving gaze. It is a bitter taste of her own medicine. Before they reach the next car, she unsuccessfully pleads for him to remove her handcuffs. He is not exactly in a trusting mood. The group enters a vibrant classroom car where a cheerful teacher is busy molding young minds. She leads the children in a rehearsed and suspiciously enthusiastic greeting for the guests. But Tanya and Andrew ignore the pleasantries and desperately search the room for their missing children. Andrew shows a picture of his son Timmy to the students, pleading for any information. A young boy eventually points toward the front of the train where the guards took them. A student repeats propaganda about the tail sectioners being lazy, and Mason offers a fake defense to keep her captors calm. The teacher then starts a propaganda film detailing the childhood obsession Wilford had with locomotives. It describes the founding of the global railway, painting a portrait of a man who turned a hobby into a religion. The video continues by illustrating the massive scale and the year-long route of the train. It highlights the advanced tech and Wilford's foresight, because apparently, he is the only guy who saw the Ice Age coming. The teacher then claims that old-world critics used to mock his over-engineered designs. But a student interjects, explaining that those people died simply because they did not listen to their savior. Following this, the instructor explains that Wilford built the engine specifically to save the Chosen. Then she and the children celebrate the engine as his ultimate invention. The students even recite a grim pledge that they will all freeze if the engine ever stops. Soon after, she gathers the children at the window to view a landmark in the frozen wasteland outside. She describes the revolt of the Seven, where a group of passengers tried to escape the train years ago. The class looks out to see the frozen corpses of those rebels, still standing in the snow like macabre lawn ornaments. Nam identifies the lead rebel as an Inuit survival expert who thought she could make it on the outside. The teacher then leads a final pledge that leaving the train results in certain death. Just then, a man arrives to deliver boiled eggs to the children as a traditional New Year gift. The Eggman even hands out snacks to the tail section rebels and Mason, which is surprisingly polite for a class war. However, Curtis inspects his egg and notices a small, suspicious hole in the shell. So he cracks it open to find a red message slip hidden inside, which is never a sign of a good day. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out and kills the violinist as the music stops abruptly. The Eggman pulls a hidden gun from his cart and begins a frantic attack. Even the pregnant teacher draws a pistol and starts firing at the tail sectioners. A violent shootout breaks out, and the classroom quickly turns into a total disaster zone. Curtis manages to capture the teacher during the chaos to put an end to the shooting spree. However, a nearby monitor shows the brutal execution of Gilliam back in the tail section. It is a blow they did not see coming. The rebels watch in total despair as their mentor is murdered on screen. The movement just lost its heart. While they mourn, Tanya tells Curtis that he has to be the one to lead the group forward now. The teacher pleads for her life, but Curtis shoots her anyway in retaliation for the violence. Forgiveness is not on the menu today. He reloads his gun and coldly declares that the mission will continue despite their losses. Curtis, Nam, and Yona begin advancing through the train corridors toward the front of the engine. Soon they enter a luxurious lounge car, where wealthy passengers stare in shock at the dirty invaders. They definitely ruin the vibe. Meanwhile, guards and a man in a gray suit discover the body of the teacher back in the classroom car. Outside, the train travels across a massive bridge as it rounds a sharp curve in the mountains. The man in the gray suit prepares his rifle and takes aim right out of the train window. He fires at the rebels in the other car as the train curves. Apparently, long-distance sniping is a job requirement here. Curtis immediately returns fire across the gap between the cars, shattering the glass. Both men duck back to reload their weapons after the heavy exchange of fire. This is a very intense way to commute. The long-distance shootout resumes as they trade shots across the frozen mountain pass. The man in the gray suit finally leaves the classroom to pursue the rebels on foot through the train. He catches up and opens fire through a closing door in the beauty salon, sending everyone into a panic. The man and his guards reach a secure door marked with the large W logo that signifies Wilford's territory. They step through the threshold and enter a steam-filled sauna area. Following this, guards in tactical gear move cautiously into the smoky corridor to secure the area against the uprising. In the chaos of the steam, the man in the gray suit accidentally shoots one of his own passengers. Nice work, Hawkeye. Curtis ignores the friendly fire and engages the assassin in a shootout through the narrow hallway. They eventually run out of bullets and resort to a brutal hand-to-hand struggle in the corridor. But Curtis gains the upper hand when he manages to stab the assassin in the arm during the fight. The wounded assassin retreats into a steam room, where he finds a passenger just trying to enjoy a shower. He attacks the woman as she tries to flee, showing that he is a dickhead right to the very end. However, Curtis finally catches up and kills the assassin in the steam room, ending the long pursuit. Following the kill, he checks on Nam and Yona as they recover from the exhaustion of the battle. While they catch their breath, he finds Tanya, who is dying from the severe wounds she sustained earlier. She uses her final moments to hand him a small, worn photograph of her son, Timmy. Curtis promises to find the boy and bring him back, a weight he will carry as he moves forward. He then leaves the survivors behind and walks alone into a dark, quiet section of the train. Just past the darkness, he discovers a lavish party happening in the very next car. The wealthy passengers dance and drink, completely oblivious to the revolution and the bodies piled up just a few doors back. Nam joins him and traverses the hedonistic club car, looking confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. Suddenly, a man in the club aggressively demands that they return his supply of chronol. The man in the suit simply stares back with a bloodied face, signaling that things are about to change. Moving on, the group enters a hazy sauna car filled with passengers in a drug-induced stupor. While the world ends, Nam and Yona scavenge the unconscious bodies to collect more of the precious chronol. Finally, Curtis reaches a metal staircase leading to a massive reinforced door at the front of the train. They have finally reached the end of the line, where the golden Wilford Industries logo marks the entrance to the engine. Curtis orders Nam to open the final gate, but the locksmith surprisingly refuses to budge. Frustrated by the delay, he violently attacks Nam in a desperate attempt to force his cooperation. The two men engage in a brutal struggle right in front of the locked engine door while the Golden W watches over them. Exhausted and battered, they eventually give up the fight and sit together on the cold metal stairs. Then Nam offers a small peace offering by handing over a worn box of cigarettes. He sits quietly while Curtis lights up, taking a long drag as they face the end of their journey. Nam mentions these are likely the last cigarettes in existence, a small luxury that will never be replaced. While they smoke, Curtis asks him if he knows the true horrors that happened in the Tales section years ago. He begins to describe the absolute chaos and starvation that took hold immediately after the train departed. With a hollow stare, he confesses that the passengers were forced to eat the weak just to stay alive. The admission comes with a deep sense of shame as he admits he knows exactly what humans taste like. He breaks down completely, while revealing the unthinkable truth that the babies tasted the best. Nam watches in a heavy silence as the leader of the revolution weeps over his own monstrous past. The story continues with a memory of a woman who tried to hide her child from a group of armed, hungry men. He explains how those men killed the mother and seized the infant for their next meal. But then an old man stepped forward to stop the violence with a sacrifice no one expected. That man took a knife and severed his own arm right there in front of the crowd. He offered his own limb as food, finally teaching the survivors how to be human again by sparing the child. Curtis reveals the infant saved by that sacrifice was Edgar. The weight of the secret clearly hurts. But the confession gets darker as he admits he was the one who murdered the mother of Edgar. So much for a clean conscience. Following this, he describes how other passengers began following the old man's lead by sacrificing their own limbs. He then details his own failed attempt to give up an arm, proving that sometimes even self-mutilation has a learning curve. The protein blocks from Wilford finally arrived 1 month later, ending the period of forced cannibalism. He reflects on 18 years spent hating Wilford while waiting for this exact moment to reach the front. Desperate for closure, he pleads with Nam to open the final gate leading into the engine room. However, the gatekeeper refuses to help him move forward toward the front of the train. Nam explains that he actually wants to open a different door instead, which is a hell of a time for a pivot. He points to a side door that leads directly out into the frozen, wasteland world outside. The man explains the exterior door has been frozen shut for nearly 2 decades. But he expresses a new belief that life can finally survive outside these metal walls again. To prove his point, he uses the visible wreckage of a plane to show the ice is slowly melting. He observes the plane wreckage sitting under the snow as the train passes the mountain range. As more of the fuselage and wings become visible, it seems the world is finally thawing out. He notes the snow is fragile and ready to collapse, suggesting a shift in the environment. The big reveal comes when he explains that chronol is actually a highly flammable chemical bomb. It turns out he was not just a drug addict. He collected the scraps specifically to blow their way out of the train. He begins attaching the explosive mixture to the final engine door for a grand exit. Just then, the door opens from the inside, and the woman in the yellow coat greets them before they can light the fuse. Instead of a fight, the woman in the yellow coat politely invites Curtis to a dinner date with Wilford himself. Leaving his group behind, he enters the engine room alone to finally face the man behind the curtain. Wilford is waiting for him with a warm welcome and a steak dinner, appearing more like a tired grandfather than a god. He marvels at the fact that Curtis has walked the entire length of the train, a journey that has taken 18 years to complete. The inventor describes the crushing loneliness of living in the engine, where the only constant is the eternal hum of the machine. He claims that everyone on board has a preordained position, from the tail section scavengers to the cooks in the front. Because the train is a closed ecosystem, he explains that a cold, calculated balance must be maintained at any cost. When nature fails to limit the population, he suggests that more radical solutions are required to prevent total extinction. Wilford casually eats his dinner while explaining that orchestrated killing is the only way to stop everyone from starving to death. The entire revolution was not a genuine uprising, but a scripted production designed to trim the headcount. Curtis is devastated as Wilford reveals that Gilliam was actually his partner, helping manage the train through staged chaos. The original plan was for the revolt to end much earlier, but the rebels simply proved too effective at fighting back. Since the front section lost too many people, Wilford explains that he had to execute Gilliam to keep the numbers even. He then picks up a wall phone to check in on the massacre happening at the other end of the train. A henchman in the tail section confirms they are currently on track to hit their target reduction of 74%. Wilford orders his man to spare 18 survivors as a symbolic gesture for their 18th year on the tracks. Curtis is forced to listen to the rapid gunfire as the culling of his people begins in real time. Wilford mocks his distress by repeating a crude joke about women that he claims Gilliam used to tell him. He reminisces about their late-night phone calls, insisting that fear and chaos are the only tools that keep people in line. But things are about to get messy, as the suited assassin wakes up among a pile of bodies and reaches for his gun. The assassin is not finished yet, as he painfully pulls a metal hook from his own gut to continue his hunt. While he recovers, Yona wakes up in a dark compartment and finds Nam nearby. The two try to catch their breath amidst the lingering chaos. But they are quickly interrupted when an attacker lunges at them in the dark hallway, forcing a desperate struggle. Once the threat is cleared, Nam points out a specific set of cables. He tells Yona they have a very different door to open. Back in the office, Wilford explains that fear and anxiety must be manufactured to keep the train in balance. While he monologues, Nam and Yona ignore the rioting nearby and focus on preparing their explosive device. Wilford then decides the history lesson is over and invites Curtis to finally see the engine for himself. He leads the rebel leader toward the heart of the machine, which looks more like a cathedral than a motor. The two men walk through a glowing corridor where the hum of the train is all-consuming. They eventually reach the inner sanctum, the very spot Curtis has spent his entire life trying to reach. Wilford speaks with religious devotion about his lifelong commitment to keeping this metal tube moving. He describes the engine as eternity itself, a closed system that requires a steady hand to survive. Then he asks Curtis a pointed question. When was the last time he was actually alone? This guy really loves the sound of his own voice. As Curtis becomes visibly emotional, Wilford tells him to take his time. He is remarkably polite for a genocidal conductor. The weight of the journey and the truth about Gilliam finally cause Curtis to suffer a mental breakdown. The cost of the revolution is finally sinking in. He collapses to his knees in total despair, realizing his entire mission might have been exactly what Wilford wanted. He continues to weep while Wilford watches with a calm, predatory patience. Just then, Wilford reaches into his pocket and hands over one final red message slip. Curtis opens the small capsule to find a single word written inside: train. It seems the mystery is finally coming full circle. Wilford leans in close and offers Curtis the ultimate promotion. He wants him to take over as the new leader of the train. He claims this was actually Gilliam's plan all along, framing the entire bloody revolution as a twisted job interview. Then he places a hand on the shell-shocked rebel and guides him toward the heart of the engine room. While they walk, Wilford explains the cold math of the train sections and the brutal balance required to keep humanity moving. He equates this metal tube to the entire world, suggesting that there is absolutely nothing left for them outside these walls. So he tells Curtis that he must lead to prevent total extinction. Apparently, being a dictator is just a civic duty now. But the warning comes with a grim reminder that without a firm hand, people will inevitably start devouring one another. Just then, Claude enters the hallway with a gun to put a stop to the remaining rebels once and for all. However, Yona lunges at her to protect the bomb preparation. This kid has officially had enough of the polite staff. As she desperately tries to retrieve the chronal, Nam stays busy fighting off the approaching guards. But the assassin soon realizes that Yona's gun is completely empty. That is a hell of a time to run out of ammo. Nam continues to trade blows with the guards while shouting for his daughter to finish the job with the explosives. Back in the office, Wilford points out the chaos on the monitors as proof that his cynical theory is correct. He forces Curtis to watch the violence unfolding across the train, using the blood on screen to justify his own tyranny. He whispers that Curtis is the only one who can save these people from their own worst impulses. Following this, he declares that leading the engine is not just a choice, it is the man's actual destiny. Outside, Nam engages the assassin in one last desperate struggle to buy Yona enough time to reach the door. Soon after, she finally manages to reach the engine room and finds Curtis standing there in a daze. She ignores the old man and pries open a hidden floor panel, sensing that something is very wrong beneath the surface. The horrific truth is finally revealed as little Timmy is found working as a human part inside the machinery. The engine is not eternal, it is just fueled by children. Wilford calmly explains that because the machinery is failing, children have become the only available replacement parts. It is basically the worst internship in history. Horrified by the truth, Curtis snaps and launches himself at the old man in a blind rage. But he realizes he has to prioritize the boy, so he sacrifices his own arm by jamming it into the gears to stop the machine and pull Timmy out. As he bleeds out, he hands Yona the matches for the chronal bomb. She rushes back to her father with the light, knowing this is their only chance to break the cycle. While the world begins to crumble around them, she finally ignites the fuse. There is no turning back now. However, the nightmare is deeper than they thought, as she discovers another child, Andy, trapped in a different section of the engine. Just then, the assassin tries to reach the children one last time, but he is far too late to stop the countdown. Nam and Curtis use their final moments to shield the children with their own bodies. It is a heavy price for a glimmer of hope. The bomb detonates, and the sheer force of the explosion rips through the heart of the train. The blast triggers a massive avalanche on the slopes above, and a wall of snow begins to bury the metal snake. In the chaotic aftermath, Yona and Timmy emerge from the wreckage. They are the only ones left standing in the silence. The plan to blow the side door finally works as the structural integrity of the train gives way. Wilford sits at his table, watching his empire collapse over a glass of wine. Talk about a bad dinner review. The exterior door is blown completely off, exposing the interior to the frozen world outside for the first time in years. The vibration from the blast echoes across the mountain, and the true power of nature is about to wake up. Suddenly, a colossal wave of snow slams into the cars, knocking the entire train off its tracks. The cars derail and tumble down the mountain, turning the eternal engine into a heap of twisted scrap metal. The long ride is finally over. Everything settles into a grim, white graveyard in the valley below as the smoke clears. Yona and Timmy crawl out of the debris, stepping out into a world that was supposed to be dead, but might just be waking up. Amidst the burning debris and flickering embers, Yona calls out for her father, but only the crackling of the fire answers her. She pushes through the smoke toward a massive breach in the hull where the frozen world is finally leaking in. Taking a shaky first step, the pair finally leaves the metal tomb and feels the crunch of real snow under their boots. They wander away from the wreckage of the eternal engine, which now looks like nothing more than a discarded toy in the vast white valley. Yona pulls back her hood to breathe the air her ancestors took for granted, and she realizes the world is not as empty as they were told. As they spot a polar bear on the ridge, it becomes clear that life found a way to survive without a ticket. The train was never the only hope. Seeing a polar bear confirms that life survived the frost, and humanity is finally free from the train. Subscribe for more movie recaps.